Hello students, my name is Prakhar Verma. I'm your JE faculty and today we are gonna discuss the advanced paper 1. Alright, so welcome guys, this is our platform Infinity Learn by Sri Chaitanya. Okay, so let's start with our question number 1 of advanced, which was based on the concept of vernier caliper. Alright, so let's see what are the informations that are given in this question. Alright, so it is given that this vernier caliper, the main scale has the least count of 0.1 centimeter. All right, so that means the distance between any two division is gonna be 0.1 centimeter. All right, and other than that, then another information is given that 10 divisions of vernier scale corresponds to 9 divisions of the main scale. All right, and now in the drawing, as you can see, two figures are given. This one will indicate, figure number 1 will indicate, it will tell you that what is the zero error in the device. All right, and in the figure number 2, some reading is taken. All right, and the question is asking that what is the correct diameter of the sphere which is kept between the jaws. Okay, so let's try to understand. We'll start with the basic concept of vernier caliper. The first information that is given, from there will get us step number 1. The first information was given that the one main scale division is equal to 0.1 centimeter, right guys? That was the first information given to us. In the second information, it was given that 10 vernier scale divisions were corresponding to how many? 9 main scale division. All right, so this will give us that 1 VSD is basically equal to how much? 0.9 MSD, right? And we know that 1 MSD is 0.1 centimeter, so this will give us 0.09 centimeter. All right guys, okay, now can I calculate least count from these two information? It's quite simple. The formula of least count is 1 MSD minus 1 VSD. Okay, if I'll plug this value, 1 MSD is 0.1 and 1 VSD is 0.09, this will give me how much? It will give me 0.01 centimeter. This least count I'm gonna use it later on. All right, okay, now let's come to the figures. Figure number 1 is indicating, it's helping me out to find out how much is the zero error. All right, okay, so the first thing that I can see from this drawing is that the zero of vernier scale is on the left side of zero of main scale. All right, so this indicates that this type of error is going to be a zero negative error. All right, okay, so I want to find out that how much is the error, how much is the value of that error. Okay, so for that I just need to calculate that how much is this difference. Let's say this difference is some value small e. All right, the gap between this 0 and this 0, this magnitude of e is going to give me the zero error which is here. All right, so how to find out this small e? So first we are going to see that which division is going to coincide. Okay, so from the top, if I'll see that this division, so this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So this is the 5th division of main scale coinciding with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6th division of vernier scale. All right, now I know that in main scale the gap between two division is 0.1. all right, so this gap from here to here is going to be how much? 5 division multiplied by 0.1 is going to give you 0.5 centimeter, right? And now similarly in the vernier scale, 6 divisions and 1 division, 1 VSD is equal to how much? 0.09, right? So 6 into 0.09 is going to give you okay, I'll just write down here. Okay, here you can simply write that this is 5 multiplied by 0.1, right? And here you can write 6 multiplied by 0.09. all right, okay, so the value of E can be given as 6 into 0.09 minus 5 into 0.1. all right, this will give you the value of E. Okay, now let's move on to the actual reading. Okay, so in this drawing we have kept one object between the jaws, and what it is showing that after 3, this is 3.1 and this 0 is coming on the right side of this division. Okay, so my observed reading is gonna be, observed reading will be 3.1 will be definitely there, plus which division is coinciding? The first division of vernier scale is coinciding, right? So 1 multiplied by, what is the least count of this device? That is 0.01. So 1 multiplied by 0.01 is gonna give us how much? 3.11 centimeter, right? This is the observed reading that I'm getting, right? Now I want to calculate how much is the actual reading. So to calculate actual reading, I have to subtract observed reading minus this value. Okay, so this error, we know that it's gonna be a -0 error. Okay, so this value is coming out to be how much? That we will put here, negative of E. Okay, so observed reading is 3.11, and if you calculate this value, this will come out to be 0.04. So this will be 3.15 centimeter, and that is gonna be the answer to your question. Let's move on to our next question, guys. All right, so in this question a PV diagram is given to us, and as we can see that it's a combination of isobaric and isochoric process. It's a cyclic process given to us. The question is asking us that in this cycle heat is absorbed by the gas in which step. All right, so heat absorbed means what? Heat absorbed means the value of Q is gonna be positive, right? Okay, all right. So if I'll go step by step, in step number one is what? Step number one is isobaric process, right? So in isobaric process, in step number one, can I say that the value of Q is gonna be equal to NCP delta T? Because this is an isobaric process, right? Okay, so in order to check whether Q is going to be positive or negative, I have to think about the temperature difference, right? All right, so how to think about it? If I'll draw the isotherms in PV diagram, those isotherms looks like this, right? So this is the lower temperature, and as I'll go upward, the temperature will increase, right? So if I'll look at this arrow says that I'm going towards this way. It means the temperature is increasing, and if delta T is, temperature is increasing, delta T is gonna be positive, so Q is gonna be positive. So yes, in step number one, the value of Q is gonna be positive, right? Now, if I look at step number two, in step number two, Q, this is an isochoric process. For isochoric process, I take Q as NCV delta T, right? If I'll go down, as you can see in this isotherm, the temperature is decreasing, right? And if temperature is decreasing, this delta T is gonna be negative, so Q gonna be negative, right? Now if I look at step number three is again an isobaric process, same Q equal to NCP delta T formula I'm gonna use, right? Now if I'll go from here till here, you will see that temperature is still decreasing, okay? So that means delta T is gonna be negative, Q is gonna be negative, okay? Now if I'll go to step number 4, in step number 4, it's an isochoric process. Isochoric process, here you can say that the temperature is increasing. I'm gonna use the formula Q equal to NCV delta T. Temperature is increasing, that means delta T is positive, so Q is positive, right? So now I can see that in step number 1 and in step number 2, the value of Q is coming to be positive. The value of Q is positive, it means it's an system, the gas is absorbing the heat, right? So if I look at the option, I'll see that option C is gonna be my correct answer to this question. Okay friends, now we are gonna discuss our next question, which is based on the ray optics. As you can see in the drawing, that two lenses, they are placed next to each other, okay? So the question says that there is an object here which is at a distance of 10 centimeter, all right, and another lens is kept here which is also at a distance of 10 centimeter, okay? So a basic concept is that this object, this lens is going to form an image of this object, that will be my image number 1, and that image will again act like an object for this lens, all right? So 2 times magnification is going to happen. The question is asking that what will be the total magnification of the lens, all right? So the concept that we are going to apply is that we will use our lens formula 2 times, okay? Now to write the lens formula, we need to find the value of their focal length, okay? Now if you'll see in the question that it is given radius of curvature of both the surfaces is 20 centimeter, right? So the first thing is we need to find that what is going to be the focal length of this individual lenses. All right, so first I have to apply the lens maker formula. Okay, so lens maker formula is again simple. If I just write the formula here, okay, so 1 by f1, let's say I want to calculate f1, right? So the refractive index of both the lenses is given 1.5. I'll put 1.5 by 1 for this one, okay, and for this one I'll use the focal length as 20. 20 is given, yeah, okay. So these are the radius of curvature, and I'm using all the sign conventions properly here, so no need to worry about it. So if you'll calculate the value of f1, that is gonna be how much? Equal to 20 centimeter, right? Now similarly, if you'll apply the lens maker's formula for the second lens, okay, so this value will come out to be, only the change of sign is going to take place, and the value of f2 is going to be equal to minus 20 centimeter. All right, now let's move on to the next part. We need to apply the lens formulas over here. So for the first lens, if I'll use the lens formula, so that is going to be 1 by f equal to 1 by v. All right, like this. Okay, so the value of focal length we have already calculated, that is plus 20. The value of v I'm interested in, the value of u I'll put as negative 10. I'm using the sign convention very carefully, very important in such type of questions. So the value of v I'm gonna get will be minus 20. All right, so here if I'll calculate the magnification, I'll use the formula plus v by u, again with the proper sign convention. My magnification will come out to be as negative 2 here. All right, now if I'll move on to my second lens, see, v is getting, my answer is coming minus 20. So in this drawing I can see that some image I1 is gonna be formed here, which is at a distance of 20 away from lens 1, right? So now this I1 is gonna be the object for this lens. Okay, so this I1 from lens number 2 will be at a distance of how much? 30 centimeter. So now 30 centimeter will be my object distance. Okay, again I'll use this formula. So the focal length is negative 20 for this concave lens, and the v I need to find, the u is gonna be negative 30. So after calculation, this v will come out to be minus 12, and if I'll calculate my magnification for this part, I will get it as plus 2 by 5. Okay, so now it's time to calculate the total magnification. Very simple, we just need to multiply both the values of m1 and m2. So the total magnification is gonna be m1 multiplied by m2, right? And that value will come out to be negative 0.8. If you look at the options, positive, negative, nothing is given, only magnitude we are concerned. So option B will be the correct answer to this question. Alright students, so let's move on to our next question. This question is from the chapter nucleus, and radioactivity concept is briefed in this question. Alright, okay, so question says that initially we have a nucleus Q, and this nucleus Q has a half-life of 20 minutes. Alright, so during this half-life, during the first half-life, that means in the duration of first 20 minutes, this Q is gonna decay in basically two parts. Some part will be the alpha decay, some part will be the beta decay, and some Q will be left over. All right, so this Q, which is initially given to us, all right, so the initial number of Q is 1000 given to us. After 20 minutes it's gonna get decay. So because this is an half-life, so 50% will get decay and 50% will remain same. Okay, so out of 1000, 50%, that means 500 will remain as it is. Okay, and some will be decayed in alpha particles, and some will form beta particle, right? But how many alpha and how many beta? For that, another hint is given to the question, that 60% is the probability of alpha decay and 40% is the probability of beta decay. Okay, so 60-40 is the ratio. Basically it is 3:2 ratio, right? So 500 are here. Now remaining 500 I have to split in two parts. Okay, so if I'll do a ratio of 3:2, this will come out to be 300, and this will come out to be how much? 200. Okay, this will be equal to 200, right? Okay, here you can see that initially we have 1000 and finally also we have 1000, so no errors as of now, right? Now the remaining Q, the remaining q, which are in the quantity of 500 right now, again after one half life, after next 20 minutes, out of 500, 50% will remain. So out of 500, only 250 will remain, and the remaining 250 will again decay in a ratio of 3:2. So that ratio, if you'll take, it will come out to be 150, and this is gonna be 100. Okay. Now similarly, after again half life, that is initial number will be 250, and in the third half life 50% will remain. Okay, so out of 250, only 125 will remain over here, and the remaining alpha and beta will be divided into 3:2 ratio. Okay, so 3:2 should be the ratio. The total alpha plus beta combination should have 125 nucleuses. Okay, so this will come out to be 75, and this will come out to be 50. All right. Okay, so 20, 20, 20, that means 60 minutes, 1 hour. The question has already asked us that what we have to find the numbers in the first 1 hour. Okay, so now 1 hour is completed. I want to find how many number of alpha decays has happened, the total number of alpha nucleuses. So if I'll add all these alpha nucleuses, okay, 300 plus 150 plus 75, I will get how much? I will get 525. Okay, so option D will be my answer to this question. Okay, students, so now we are gonna discuss a question which is based on the motion in a plane. All right, so this is a question which is a combination of projectile motion and the conservation of momentum thing also happening over here. Okay, so the question says that we have a projectile and we are gonna throw this projectile, at an angle of 45 degree, and with the speed of 5√2 meter per second. Okay, so what is going to happen in this question is that at the topmost position it's going to split into two parts. Okay, and then question is saying that the first part will fall down like this, and the remaining part should go in this way, and it should land over at this point. Okay, so two things based on this question we need to find. The first part is that what is the total distance of the point where the final part will land from the initial point, that I need to find, and also I need to find that how much time it will take for the other particle to land to the ground. Okay, so let's look at its solution. All right, so initially projectile 5√2 meter per second is the initial speed. From vertical it is thrown at an angle of 45 degree. So when it will reach to the highest point, there will be no vertical component, only the horizontal component will be there, that is u cos theta, or in this case u sin theta. Okay, so that is gonna be 5 meter per second. Right now at the topmost position the splitting is taking place, so now we will apply conservation of momentum at the highest point. Okay, so after applying that, we will see that the first part, it's directly falling down to the point C. So that means the speed at this point, this part is 0, and the velocity of the second part is going to be equal to 10 meter per second. So now because it has a higher speed of 10 meter per second, okay, so this will go slightly at a larger distance. Okay, all right. So now to calculate the time, first we will calculate what is the maximum height that this particle has achieved. So in the y direction I can use this formula to calculate the height, which is going to be 1.25 centimeter. Okay, now if I'll apply the kinematics equation from point B to D, I can see that the vertical distance this second particle needs to cover will be 1.25 only, and this has a horizontal speed of 10 but no vertical component, so no vertical speed component I have taken here. The acceleration due to gravity is 10. From here I'll get the time. So this is the time, 0.5 second taken by this second particle to touch the ground. Okay, so the first part, the question is asking the time, so that time is going to be equal to 0.50 seconds. All right, now later on I need to calculate what is the total distance AD. In order to do so, first I will calculate what is the distance CD, right? So I will apply equation of kinematics in along the x-axis. So this CD I need to find. Initial speed 10 is given to me, time I have already calculated 0.5 second, no horizontal acceleration, so this is going to give me 5 meter. Right now I want to find out the EC, which is the initial or the half of the range of the initial part. Okay, so here I also am applying the equation of kinematics. Along the x-axis, the initial horizontal speed 5√2 Sine 45 will be 5 only. The time taken is 0.5 second from point A to point B. Okay, so this is gonna come 2.5 meter, right? So now the total distance, that this is the 5 meter, this is 5 meter, and this value is 2.5. If I'll add both of them, I will get 7.5 meter, right? So here 7.50 meter will be your final answer. So students, now we are going to discuss this question, which is from the chapter of capacitance, and here we have been given a circuit diagram. Okay, so this is one of an RC combination that we need to take care about. All right, so this question says that initially P and S are connected. Okay, so because of that, finally some charge will be accumulated over this capacitor that we need to find as Q1, and then we are going to change the circuit. In second part, we will connect Q and S. The different charge is going to accumulate over here, that will be our Q2. So these two values we need to find. Okay, so we will go step by step. First we will do a PS connection. All right, okay, so in this case what will happen, after a very long time during steady state, capacitor will be fully charged and there will be no current flowing, so we can remove this capacitor which is connected between these 2 points. Okay, now the current will flow like this. I'll apply the Ohm's law. I can calculate the value of I1. Okay, 2 volt, 1 volt, opposite polarity, so total voltage is 2 minus 1, and these two are series, so 1 plus 2, that will give me I1 as 1 by 3 ampere. Okay, now I will write down the Kirchhoff's equation going from point B to A, and here I can find out the voltage difference between these 2 points, that is going to be equal to 4 by 3 volt. All right, now the same voltage is across the capacitor, okay, which I have not shown here, but that is over here connected. So that charge on that capacitor Q1 is given by Q equal to CV formula. The value of capacitance is 1 microfarad. Okay, this will give me the value of charge Q1 as 4 by 3 microcoulomb, but I need to report my answer in 2 decimal places. So 1.33 will be my answer for Q1. And in the second form of the connection, when Q and S are connected, same strategy we are going to use. No current across this capacitor, fully charged, so only current will be in the outer circuit. This I2, I will apply the Ohm's law. Only one battery, 2 resistors in series, current will be 2 by 3 ampere. And now I will calculate the potential difference between point C and D by applying the Kirchhoff equation. That will come out to be 2 by 3 volt. Okay, and Q is calculated by C into V. We know the capacitance is 1 microfarad over here and the voltage is 2 by 3 volt. Okay, so 2 by 3 microcoulomb is my final answer, but again I need to find my answer in 2 decimal places. Okay, so the final answer will be 0.67 microcoulomb for the value of Q2, and for the Q1 that will be my answer for Q1, it will be 1.33 microcoulomb. Alright students, moving on to our next question. This question is from the chapter electrostatics. The question says that we have two charges, negative Q and Q by root 3, alright, and around Q by root 3 we have drawn one equipotential surface. Okay, the special thing about this equipotential surface is that the potential on these dotted circle at all the point is gonna be 0. Okay, now in the question it is given that this negative Q is placed on the origin 0, 0, its coordinate is given, and 2, 0 is the coordinate of another charged particle that is given to us. All right, one thing is also there, that the center of the circle, the coordinate is how much? B, 0. Okay, so this distance is gonna be how much? This distance is gonna be equal to B, and the radius of the circle is capital R. So these two values I need to find based on the given information in the question. Okay, so I'm gonna use a bit of the geometry. All right, okay, so now look at this overwhelming thing. Okay, there's nothing special I've done, a basic geometry work I've done. So there were 3 values which were given in the question, that 2 is the distance between the charged particles, B is the radius of the distance of center from the origin is B, and the radius of the circle is capital R. Now what is my idea? The idea to solve the question is that I have selected 2 points on this dotted circle. Those 2 points is this one, point A, and this one, point B. Okay, in question it is given that the total potential at this point A is gonna be 0. At this point both the charged particle give their contribution. Okay, so if I look at point A, this is the contribution from charge minus q. This is the contribution from charge q by root 3. Okay, using the geometries we can calculate the distances between this charge and point A and this charge and point A. All right, so after solving this one, we will get a two variable equation. All right, now similarly at point B also the voltage is 0 given in the question. At point B, both the charge particles will give their contribution. So this is the contribution from negative q, this is the contribution from q by root 3. The distances I have taken based upon the geometry part. All right, okay, so now I have two equations and two variables to solve. After solving, you will get that r is coming out to be root 3 and b is coming out to be 3, but another we need to report my answer in best two decimal places. So this is going to be 1.73, this is going to be 3.00. okay, so this is the final answer to this question. So students, now we are moving on to our next question. This question is a rotational dynamics question. Okay, question says that we have a cylindrical object. It could be a solid object or it could be a hollow object. On this object we have applied a force F directly at the center. Okay, the bottom surface is rough, and in this question it is also given that we have to obey the pure rolling motion, or in this case, so definitely friction is gonna also act at this object. Okay, and due to that friction angular acceleration will appear. So A equal to alpha r ultimately we need to satisfy. Okay, now based on after reading the question, after calculating, we also have to see that what are the options, what question is trying to ask us. Okay, so question is asking that what will happen to the value of acceleration A if the cylinder is solid or hollow. Will the value of acceleration A will change or not? Okay, so my first objective is to draw a free body diagram and write down the equations. Okay, so let's try to discuss the free body diagram. Capital F, I've applied friction, let's say it is in the backward direction, and eventually rather right from the starting of the motion it's gonna start with pure rolling only, so it will have some acceleration A, and the clockwise direction will be angular acceleration alpha, right? I will write down three basic equations. One is the one is based on the translation motion. Okay, another equation is based on the rotation effects. This friction, the torque due to friction is gonna be in this direction, so F into R will be equal to I alpha, and we also have to use the equation of pure rolling, so A will be equal to alpha R. Okay, now after solving these three equations we can see that the expression of A will be Fr square divided by I plus Mr square. So acceleration is depending on the value of I. For solid, this I will become Mr square by 2. For hollow, this I will become Mr square. For different values of I, you will get different values of acceleration. So we can see that the option A is a false statement. Option is saying does not depend, but actually it depends. So option A cannot be my correct answer, right? Now moving on to the option B, it is saying that for solid cylinder, the maximum possible value of acceleration is gonna be this much. Okay, so for that we will take the case of solid cylinder. We know moment of inertia is mr square by 2. I will place this moment of inertia in the expression of friction that I have already calculated based on these three equations. All right, if I'll put the value of I over here, I'll get the value of friction, and to sustain a pure rolling I want a no slip condition. So this friction should always be less than or equal to the limiting value of the friction. After putting the proper values here, I can say that acceleration will always be less than equal to 2 mu g. That means the maximum acceleration that I can have in this case will be equal to 2 mu g. Okay, so option B will be my correct answer. Okay, now moving on to option C. Let's say what option C is saying. Option C says that the magnitude of the frictional force on the object due to the ground is always mu mg. No, that is not true, right? Why? Because this mu mg signifies the limiting value of friction. Okay, now the limiting value of friction will occur depending on the value of capital F that we are applying. If capital F is very large, on a larger scale, in that scenario, yes, it's a possibility that this friction value goes to its limiting value, and if I'll increase capital F even more, then friction will become kinetic and slipping will start. Okay, so for a moderate range of capital F, yes, the value of friction, it can be anywhere between 0 to mu mg. All right, so option C is a false statement. Okay, now for option D says that for hollow cylinder, find the value of acceleration. Okay, so again, for hollow cylinder, for a thin cylinder, we know that moment of inertia is mr square. I'll plug this value of I in the expression of friction. I will get friction as ma, and now using the translation equation, if I'll put the value of friction here, I'll get the value of acceleration, that is equal to F by 2m. So guys, option D, if you'll see that A is equal to F by 2m, yes, it's matching. So B and D are the correct answer for this question. Alright guys, our next question is from the chapter Ray Optics, and application of composite slab is given here. Alright, okay, so let's try to understand what are the data given in this question, because each option is ultimately a different question in its own rights. Okay, so it is given that we have a combination of the slabs here, N1, N2 and air. The refractive indexes N1, N2 are also given, and a light ray is going from N1 to N2, making theta is incident angle. Alright, so we have to figure out that option A, B, C, D, which of them are the correct one. Okay, another information is given to us that this sine theta, the value of sine theta is slightly larger than 1 by n1. Okay, so guys, the value of sine theta is slightly larger than 1 by n1. This is the data given in the question, and based on that we need to extract some answers. Okay, so let's go one by one. Let's first read option A. The light ray enters air if n2 is equal to n1. Okay, so we need to discuss about this point. What will happen if guys n2 is equal to n1? If we look at this drawing, if n1 and n2 they are equal, then no kind of refraction will happen, and this light ray will straight go and hit this part, and I can say that here also the angle of incidence is gonna be theta, because no deviation has taken place. N1 is equal to N2. If this is angle theta, then this is also equal to angle theta, right? Now if you go back, it is clearly mentioned, right, that sine theta is slightly larger than 1 by n1. Okay, so if sine theta is slightly larger than 1 by n1, then what's going to happen? The condition of TIR will occur. Okay, so condition, since n1 and n2 they both are equal, so I can say that n2 is also equal to n1, right? And here it is given in our question that sine theta is slightly larger than 1 by n1, so TIR is going to occur over here. The ray will not be able to go in the air. Okay, so if I look at option A, the light ray enters into air. No, why? Because TIR is gonna happen. So option A will not be my answer. Okay, now moving on to our next part of the option B. The option B says that the light ray is finally reflected back. Okay, so question wants TIR to occur. Okay, back to the medium of refractive index N1 if N2 is less than N1 and B and C looks similar. Okay, language is same, and only this condition N2 greater than N1 is shown over here. All right, okay, so we have to do some working here. We can say that if I'll apply a Snell's law, see, refraction is going to take place. This will be some value small r. This will also be my value small r, that is my angle of incidence, okay, for N2 air combination. All right, so if I'll write down the Snell's law, then I can say that N1 sine theta is equal to N2 sine r. Yes guys, we can say this equation, right? Now it is also given that sine theta is slightly greater than n1. Okay, so can I say that n1 sine theta is greater than 1? And now instead of n1 sine theta, I can use n2 sine r. So sine r will become slightly greater than this thing. Okay, now guys, focus on this part. At this position, it is given that this angle of incidence, which is sine r, is greater than 1 by n2. What does it mean? It means that this angle is more than the critical angle for this junction, then it means TIR is gonna happen. TIR will occur. If TIR will occur, then this ray will go back and it will hit over here. If this is angle R, then this will also be angle R. If I'll draw normal, here the angle of incidence will be R. Okay, and if I'll use the law of reversibility of light, if it will go in this medium with the same angle theta, a total symmetry we can observe, right? So whatever the values of N1 and N2 are here, whether N1 is less or N1 is more, the law of reversibility will happen, and ultimately the light will reach back to the medium N1. But yes, N1 cannot be equal to N2, that we have already answered in option A. Okay, so if N1 is greater or N1 is smaller, that doesn't matter. The law of reversibility will take place, a symmetry is there. So yes, the light is coming back to the medium N1. All right, so now let's look at option D. The light rays reflected back into the medium if N2 equal to 1, right? So if N2 is equal to 1, then what will happen? We can look here only. If N2 is also equal to 1, then it's effectively, it means that this is also air and this is also air, right? So theta is the angle of incidence, and we know that sine theta is more than 1 by N1. So the TIR will happen here only. It will not even go to the N2 medium. If this is angle theta, it will be reflected back with the same angle theta. So yes, option D is also my correct answer. So B, C, D is the correct answer key for this question. So guys, moving on to our next question. All right, so this is a question again from the chapter rotation motion. Okay, this is quite of a simple side of a question. All right, it says that we have a particle, and that particle is initially located at a coordinate minus L minus H. LH values are given to us, and then it will, in the starting it is at rest, it will accelerate in the positive x direction only. So basically the point will follow a linear path. Okay, and we need to calculate the angular momentum, the torque values as per the options. All right, okay, so let's go option by option. Option A says that how much time it will take for the particle to go from the starting point to this ending point L comma minus H. Okay, so if I'll make a drawing over here, I can see that point A is my starting point, right? And then point B is my final point. So from point A to point B, the particle is going to accelerate linearly, and how much time it's going to take to reach from point A to B. So I will write down the equation of kinematics from A to B. The displacement that it needs to cover is 20. Okay, as you can see from the drawing, initial speed is 0, acceleration is given to us, then time is coming out to be 2 seconds, right? If you'll see, so yes, option A is matched. Moving on to option B. Option B says that what is the torque when it reaches to the final point, right? So to calculate the torque at the final point B, we need what? We need two information, that how much is the force and how much is the perpendicular distance from origin. Okay, so from origin the R perpendicular is 1 meter given to us, right? Mass is given to us, acceleration is given to us. Plugging all the values, we will get the torque is 2, and the direction if I need to check, right? So this is the direction of force, this is the direction of positional vector. Okay, so if I'll do R cross F, it's coming out of the screen. Out of the screen is Z direction, so K cap will be its direction. Okay, now next part, 2 K cap is the correct one. In the option C, question is asking about the angular momentum when it passes through the point B final point, right? So in order to do so, what we need to find is what is the final velocity at point B, right? So we will apply equation of kinematics to get the final velocity, that is 20 meter per second, and to find angular momentum we will write down formula. Mass we know, velocity we just calculated, and again with respect to origin we are calculating the torque as well as angular momentum. The perpendicular distance is same, 1 meter, and the value of angular momentum magnitude wise it is 4. And if I'll need to check the direction, then again the direction is coming out of the page, K cap. If we'll look at the options, then yes, L equal to 4 K cap, again it is matching. Now in the final option, question is saying that when the particle passes through this coordinate, at that moment what is the value of torque, whether it is K cap or something else, let's look at the drawing. At point C, we need to find out the value of the torque. If I'll again use the formula F into R perpendicular, then if I'll plug all the values, same, I'm getting the torque as 2 k cap even at this point C, right? Okay, so if I'll check, yeah, option D does not match. So A, B, C is the correct answer key for this question. So students, now we are gonna discuss our next question, which is based on the hydrogen spectrum. All right. In this question, we have to go by all the options one by one, right? We have to select the correct options out of A, B, C, D. Okay. So let's start with first option. It is talking about the longest wavelength and shortest wavelength in Balmer series, right? So now recall what is Balmer series. Okay. So any higher orbit to n equal to 2 will give you a Balmer series, right? So for the longest wavelength, the transition should happen from 3 to 2. Corresponding to that, the wavelength will be the 1 by wavelength will be 5R by 36, right? And for the shortest wavelength, the transition should happen from infinity to 2, which is kind of the series limit, right? And the shortest wavelength, the reciprocal of shortest wavelength will come out to be R by 4. And simple calculation, we need to take the ratio. The ratio will come out to be 9 by 5. And if I'll check, then yes, option A will match. Okay, now moving on, let's read option B. There is an overlap between wavelength ranges of Balmer and Paschen, and a similar option is given in D also, that whether there is gonna be an overlap in Lyman or Balmer, right? Okay, so what we'll do, we'll recall, okay, Lyman series goes any higher state to 1, Balmer goes from any higher state to n equal to 2, and in Paschen from any higher state transition happening to the third orbit, right? If you'll see all the transition, you will observe that none of them is matching, right? So Lyman, Balmer, Paschen, they all are completely exclusive, right? There's no overlapping happening between these three series lines. Okay, so if I'll check the option, there's an overlap between the wavelength and Balmer Paschen series, no, right? So option B will be my incorrect one, but option D says that the wavelength ranges of Lyman and Paschen series do not overlap. Yes, that is true statement. Yes, they do not overlap, right? Now moving on to the option C. Option C says that we have to discuss about a Lyman series. We have to take that transition is happening from some higher mth orbit to n equal to 1, and lambda naught is given the shortest wavelength. Shortest wavelength means the limit series. Okay, so if we'll do see the calculation part, for generalized purpose, we can say that transition is happening from mth to n equal to 1 orbit, and for the shortest wavelength, I'm using the limit series jumping from infinity to n equal to 1, right? Now, if I'll solve these two, I will get relation between lambda and lambda naught, right? Okay, I'm getting a negative sign over here, okay? And if I look at the option, there is a positive sign, and this term is also in the numerator. So clearly option C is not my correct answer. So the correct options will be option A and option D for this question. So students, now moving on to our next question. This question is from the chapter EMI. All right. So what is going to happen is that a main wire is given, some current is flowing through this main wire, and on using the two parallel rails, it's given a semicircular wire, right? And beneath that two rails, one resistor and one capacitor is connected, right? So what question is saying? All the values are given. All right, let's focus on the option. Option says that we need to find maximum current and maximum charge on the capacitor, right? Okay, so basically this structure is gonna be an equivalent to a growth in RC circuit, right? Okay, so what we are gonna do is that first of all, instead of this semicircular part, we are gonna create an equivalent drawing. What I can do is, if I'll join this point and this point of the semicircular, I'll get an imaginary rod. So that rod I have shown over here, and resistor and capacitors are connected as it is. Current is flowing over here, right? Okay, so first at a distance of x, I'll take an element dx. I'll calculate how much EMF is produced in this EMF, right? So basically I'm using the formula of motional EMF as BVL. So this is the magnetic field generated because of this current I at a distance of x. This is the magnetic field. It is given in the question that initially it has some velocity v and dx is the length of the element. After integrating it, I will get, and after putting the proper limits also, I will get the value of EMF as mu naught IV by 2 pi log 4, right? Now, I need to calculate the maximum current and maximum charge. Since this is an equivalent to the growth of RC circuit, the maximum current is gonna take place at t equal to 0, right? So initially this capacitor will act like normal conducting wire. I can directly apply Ohm's law to get the value of current I in this circuit. That is EMF divided by resistance. Put all the values and very cool and calmly do the calculation. You will get your final answer as 1.2 10 power minus 6 ampere, right? Now similarly, I want to calculate the maximum charge. The maximum charge is achieved at a very long time in the steady state. When this capacitor will be fully charged, there will be no current, hence all the EMF can be taken across the capacitor. I will apply the formula of charge as C multiplied by E. The capacitance value, the EMF value are known to me. If I'll plug all the values, I'll get the value of charge also. Okay, if I go to the options, then the maximum current is 1.2 10 power minus 6. The maximum current is 1.2 10 power minus 6. Obviously option B will be wrong, and the value of maximum charge I am getting as 8.4 10 power minus 12, right? Option D will be wrong. So for this question, option A and option C will be the correct answer. So students, in our next question, it's an application of accelerated beaker, right? And this question belongs to the fluid dynamics. As you can see in the figure, we have given that a tube is there, some liquid is there, and this tube is going down the plane with an acceleration of small a, right? Okay. So this angle is 45 degree given the question. The question is saying that at point 1 and point 2, if the pressure are P1 and P2, then there's a term beta where beta is P1 minus P2 by rho GD. All right. So first of all, I want to calculate P1, P2 in terms of beta. I will see that which type of equation I'm getting on, right? And then depending on the values of beta, what can I comment upon the values of acceleration that I need to understand. Okay. So let's go to the solution part. In the solution, one thing we have to make a note that small d is the internal diameter of the tube, right? And the angle of inclination is 45 degree. So the direct distance between point 1 and 2 is gonna be equal to root 2 times d. Okay. Now if I'll take the components of all the accelerations available, the gravity, the acceleration down the plane, I will get as g sine theta. So g by root 2 is my acceleration due to gravity, and this is the small a acceleration which is given in our question. Okay, so I have to connect point 1 and point 2 through a pressure equation, right? So what I'm going to do is I'll start with point number 1. Let's say at here the pressure is P1. Okay, so I want to go from 1 to D. So a generalized formula that I'm gonna apply is that because of an accelerated vehicle, the pressure increases if I go at a backward point. Okay, so the pressure difference will be how much? It will be the density of water multiplied by this distance, that is root 2d, and whatever the value of acceleration A is given to us, right? But at the same time, if I'll go up, the pressure due to gravity is going to decrease, so that's why I'm going to use a negative sign here. The distance will remain same, root 2d, and the value of acceleration in this direction is how much? G by root 2, and finally we will reach at point P2. Okay, after rearranging the terms, P1 minus P2 by rho GD will give you a relation between acceleration and G, and this relation is the required value or the required expression for beta that we need to find. Okay, now we will go option by option. For the first option says that if beta is 0, then what is the value of acceleration? Okay, so it's very simple. Now we just need to put beta equal to 0 at this position, and that will give me the value of A, that is G by root 2. So yes, option A is my correct answer, right? Now if you look at option B, then automatically if option A is correct, then option B cannot be correct, right? So if option A is correct, option B cannot be correct, right? Now option C says that put beta is root 2 minus 1 by root 2 and let's try to find the value of acceleration that we are getting. Okay, so if I'll choose my option C, if I'll put the value of beta over here, the acceleration will come out to be as g by 2. That would mean that yes, option C is my correct answer, right? And if I'll try for option D, if I'll put beta as 1 by root 2, the acceleration will come out to be this term, right, which is clearly not equal to g by 2. So option D will obviously be wrong. So A and C will be the correct answer key for this question. Okay students, now we will move on to our next question. Okay, in this question we have one alpha particle and one singly charged sulfur ion. These two charged particles, they are first accelerated through a potential V, so they will gain some kinetic energy, some velocity, and then they will pass through a region of uniform magnetic field, right? And once they enter, what will happen? They will start moving in circular orbits. Okay, we know that the formula for radius of circular orbit goes like this, which is mv upon qb. Right, now m into v is nothing but momentum, and momentum can be written as in terms of kinetic energy root 2 mk divided by qb. And how they are achieving this kinetic energy? By the potential difference. Okay, so the potential difference is v, so q into v will be the potential energy which is getting converted into kinetic energy. Okay, so if I'll take up a relationship, then I can see that radius is directly proportional to the square root of two terms. In the numerator mass will come and the denominator charge will come. Right, now my life becomes very simple, because I just need to find the ratio of the alpha particle and the ratio of sulfur ion and the alpha particle. This ratio I need to find. Okay, so I will very beautifully put all the expressions here. So since R and M, they are directly proportional, I will write down here ms by m alpha, and charge is inversely proportional under the square root sign. So here I will get q alpha and here I'll get qs. So after plugging all the values, the mass of sulfur ion, that is given to you guys 32, the mass of alpha is 4, and here the charge on alpha particle is +2 charge, and charge on sulfur, it is already given singly charged, so we will take here 1, and after solving we'll get our answer as 4. So this is a exact integer type of question. Okay, so 4 will be my correct answer. Moving on to our next question, students. Okay, this is a question again from the chapter rotational dynamics in this paper 1. This is another question from the chapter rotational dynamics. Okay, so a structure is given to us, and finally we have to calculate that what is the angular momentum of this entire structure about this point O. Alright, so what are the data points which are given in the question? First of all, we have this rod, and this rod, which has mass m and the length a, it is rotating about this point O with the angular velocity of this omega, right? And at this point another disk is there, same mass capital M, right? The radius of the disk is a by 4 given to us, but this disk is rotating about this axis with an angular velocity of 4 omega, right? So now I want to calculate the angular momentum of the entire system. So what is going to be my strategy? Very simple. First I will calculate the angular momentum of the rod, then I will add with the angular momentum of the disk about this axis, and then finally I will imagine this disk to be as a single particle situated over here, and later on I will apply the shifting of this one, and I will write the angular momentum of this disk as a particle. Okay, so how I'm gonna express all those terminologies? All right, let's see. So first of all, the total angular momentum can be broken down into two parts. One is the contribution due to rod, another one is the contribution due to disk. Okay, so this is the contribution because of rod, and because of disk there are two terms which are gonna come. The first term will be the angular momentum of the disk about this particular axis, and then we will imagine this entire disk to be as a particle situated at point C, and then we'll write the angular momentum of that particle about the same point, this O or over here. Okay, so this is basically the angular momentum about O, and then this will be the angular momentum about C, and this will be the angular momentum of this disk which is converted into particle about this point O. All right, so this will be about point O. All right, okay, so how I'm going to write down the equation? Angular momentum I into omega I'm applying. So this is the moment of inertia of this rod about an endpoint multiplied by its angular speed. For the disk, angular, we know the moment of inertia is basically mr square by 2. The radius is a by 4. I'm plugging all the values as it is. Angular velocity 4 omega is given to me. Right now, I will compress this disk. I will make it a particle. The particle is situated at point C, which is at a distance of how much? This is A, then this distance is 3a by 4 from point C to point O. All right. So a single particle mr square formula I'm gonna apply. The distance is 3a by 4 and its angular speed, since this is sitting on the rod and rod is rotating with same omega, so I'm taking this omega as it is, right? And after solving, I will get 49 by 48 ma square into omega. Question says that in the numerator I want to find the value of n, right? So in the numerator the value of n is coming out to be n equal to 49. So 49 will be my final answer to this question. So students, moving on to the last question of paper 1, here we can see that there is a small object. A small object is placed at the large evacuated hollow spherical container. Okay, so there is a small object over here, and this is kept in a container, right? So what are the data given in our question? It is given that the temperature of the surrounding is 0 Kelvin. That is the temperature of the surrounding, right? And the initial temperature of this body is 200 Kelvin. Okay, and question is saying that there are two cases that we need to consider, right? So time t1 is the time in which the temperature of this object is dropping from its value 200 Kelvin to 100 Kelvin. That is given the case number 1, and in case number 2 this value will now go to 50 Kelvin in time t2. So t2 is the basically the total time right from the starting when the temperature was 200 Kelvin dropping to the value 50 Kelvin. Okay, so these are the values of t1 t2 that I need to find, and in the end I will take the ratio of t2 and t1. Okay, so to do this, first I will go and apply the rate of cooling formula. Here the rate of change or the rate of drop of that temperature is basically equal to minus some constant values will come over here. You can check with any textbook. All right, theta power 4 minus theta naught power 4. Theta naught is the surrounding container's temperature, that is given to us 0 Kelvin. So this term will become 0, and we will now only work with the proportionality because we just need to find the ratio in the end. So this theta 4 will come down, and eventually for two different cases we will integrate this equation. Okay, the limits of the integration will depend on our cases. In case number 1, when temperature initially is 200 Kelvin, from there we are starting our time. Okay, and by the end of time t1 the temperature will reach to 100 Kelvin. Okay, after solving, T1 will come out to be 7 by 8. Similarly, now we will use the limits for case number 2, where the starting temperature is 200, and when the temperature reaches to 50 Kelvin, at that time the time is T2. After solving, we will get T2 as 63 by 8, and finally if I want to take the ratio of T2 and T1, I will get that number to be 9. So 9 is the correct answer to this question. Thank you.